Good evening to you, Neil. Firstly, no surprise, I suppose, if you're following world events, that Russia should be top of this list. But is it justified, do you think?
Not at all. I mean, I think it's quite outrageous, really, because what are the biggest threats to UK security? The biggest threats, quite clearly, to the British public have been the threat of jihadist attacks. We saw only last May in Manchester the appalling Manchester Arena bombings. We had the Westminster attacks. So it's clear that the biggest threat to us in Britain here is of jihadist attack. And yet the British government mentioned, I think, Russia was at 12 times in its report. It's falsely claimed that Russia was to blame for the Salisbury incident. In fact, they haven't produced any proof of that yet. And in actual fact, the biggest, what is actually causing this threat to British security is the British government's foreign policy, its neoconservative foreign policy, which has involved backing the very same jihadists who have brought terror to the streets of Britain in countries like Syria and Libya. Theresa May was the Home Secretary, don't forget, when the Libyan jihadists were allowed to move freely between Britain and Libya because the British government wanted Gaddafi's government toppled. And so we need to be having a proper debate here about who are the real threats. And I tell you what, it's not Russia, because Russia has actually been fighting against these jihadists, these Al-Qaeda, ISIS people in Syria, defeating them, the very same people who have brought death to the streets of Britain. So I think everything's the other way around, really. I think there are threats that are close to home and in the foreign policy of the British government.
You mentioned there, Neil, we should have a public debate about all of this, but there's no sign, there's no hint that could happen. It seems that if people sort of go against the established line of who did what, they're quickly shouted down, if you look at Jeremy Corbyn, for example.
Oh, absolutely. At least we had Gavin Williamson, the Defence Secretary, coming out, and this was reported in the Times newspaper, of course, the neoconservative Times newspaper, actually saying that people who are questioning the government narrative on Salisbury, which has more holes in it than a slab of Swiss cheese, to be honest, that these people were Russian bots, had to be Russian bots. So the idea that if you actually dare to question the narrative these days, then of course you're either a Kremlin agent or a Russian bot. And we had the spectacle of the Times defence correspondent actually emailing people or tweeting them to ask if they were real life people who follow me on Twitter, for example. How degrading is that? I mean, this is where we're at the moment, Andrew. We're in a very bad state of affairs here in Britain, where we've got the media and the government working together to create this hysteria about Russia, which is not based in any facts. It all reminds one too much of the 2003 Iraqi WMD's hoax. And once again, we had the British government coming out there saying, look, we've got evidence that Iraq has WMDs. We've got to trust us and believe us. The intelligence services are saying this too. And here we are in 2018 with the same thing happening in regard to Russia. So I think we've only got to look back to see what's happening, to see where we are, and it's very depressing to see the media, which pumped out that all those WMD lies in 2003, doing the same thing today.
Neil, always good to talk to you as always. Unfortunately, we've run out of time there, but that was Neil Clark, journalist and broadcaster. Thank you.